I'm Alannis Herrera, 32, and for years my family treated me like the eternal disappointment, the one who wasted her potential working dead-end jobs, while my younger siblings climbed their career ladders. When I announced I was applying to medical school, the laughter was immediate and brutal. "You're too old," my mother said, shaking her head. "Be realistic, Alannis." My brother Marcus rolled his eyes. "Some people just aren't cut out for that level of commitment." For 4 grueling years, I proved them wrong in silence, studying while they celebrated holidays without me, working night shifts to pay tuition while they questioned my face. One graduated summa cum laude, completed my residency, and became Dr. Herrera, the family failure turned physician. Now, when mysterious symptoms plague their perfect lives and specialists fail them, guess whose phone rings at midnight? The same. Voices that crushed my dreams now whisper, "Alannis, we need your help." If you've ever felt dismissed by those who should believe in you most, this story is for you. Growing up in the Herrera household meant understanding your place in an unspoken hierarchy. Marcus, 2 years younger than me, had claimed the throne, early with his academic prowess and natural charisma. By age 12, he was already talking about law school with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his path. Our parents hung on his every word, nodding approvingly when he discussed his future plans over dinner. Sophia, the baby at 6 years my junior, secured her position as the family's rising star through sheer brilliance. She skipped second grade, won every spelling bee, and had teachers calling home to praise her exceptional mind. While I struggled through high school algebra, Sophia was solving calculus problems for fun. The three of us created a perfect storm of comparison, with me perpetually cast as the cautionary tale. I remember the day Marcus graduated summa cum laude from his undergraduate program. The living room walls were covered with congratulatory cards, and Mom had ordered a cake decorated with scales of justice. His MBA acceptance letter to Northwestern sat framed on the mantel like a sacred relic. That same week, I had been laid off from my third retail job in 2 years, spending my days scrolling through online job boards and wondering what was wrong with me. "Alannis just needs to find her passion," Mom would tell concerned relatives, her voice carrying that particular tone reserved for discussing family disappointments. "Some people are late bloomers." The phrase stung every time, implying that at 26, I was already past my prime for blooming into anything meaningful. Sophia's marketing degree came with multiple job offers and a salary that made our parents beam with pride. She moved into a sleek downtown apartment and started posting pictures of client dinners and conference rooms on social media. Meanwhile, I was living in a studio apartment above Mrs. Garcia's bakery, the smell of fresh bread serving as a constant reminder of my humble circumstances. The family gatherings became exercises in survival. Marcus would hold court, discussing his latest cases and the partners he was impressing. Sophia would share stories about her campaigns and the brand she was building. Then the conversation would inevitably turn to me, the elephant in the room who couldn't seem to figure out her life. "Any new prospects, Maya?" Dad would ask, his voice gentle but tinged with worry. He meant well, but the question felt like a spotlight on everything I hadn't accomplished. I'd mumble something about applications and possibilities, watching as my siblings exchanged that look, the one that said they felt sorry for me, but didn't know how to help. The worst part wasn't their success. I was genuinely proud of Marcus and Sophia, admired their drive and accomplishments. The worst part was how their achievements cast such a long shadow that I couldn't see my own potential. Every family photo from that era tells the story. Marcus and Sophia positioned confidently in the center, our parents flanking them with obvious pride, me slightly apart, smiling but somehow separate from their golden circle. I kept Marcus's MBA diploma in my mind like a talisman of what real success looked like: the expensive frame, the prestigious school name, the way our parents' eyes lit up whenever they passed it in the hallway. It represented everything I wasn't: focused, accomplished, worthy of their admiration. For years, I believed that some people were simply born to achieve great things, while others, like me, were meant to drift through life collecting failures and false starts. Little did they know that during those quiet years of supposed aimlessness, I was reading medical journals late into the night, watching surgery videos online, and dreaming of a path that seemed impossibly out of reach for someone like me. The MCAT study guide lived under my bed for 6 months before I found the courage to crack it open. Dog-eared from use, highlighted in 3 different colors. It became my secret companion during those long nights when the bakery below fell silent and the city settled into sleep. I quizzed myself on organic chemistry, while the scent of tomorrow's pastries wafted through the thin floors. By the time I gathered the nerve to tell my family about medical school, I had already taken the MCAT twice. The first score wasn't competitive, enough for my dream schools, but the second attempt yielded numbers that made my heart race with possibility. Still, I carried that study guide everywhere. Its worn cover a reminder that some dreams required more preparation than others. The family dinner happened on a Sunday in March. Mom had made her famous enchiladas, and the table buzzed with the usual updates. Marcus had just won a significant case involving corporate fraud, and Sophia was celebrating a campaign that had gone viral for her agency. The timing felt both perfect and terrible. They were riding high on their successes, which meant they might be generous with their support, or too absorbed in their own achievements to take mine seriously. "I have some news to share," I announced. During a lull in Sophia's story about her latest client acquisition, the words came out steadier than I felt inside. "Please tell me you finally found a real job," Marcus said, not looking up from his phone where he was likely checking work emails, even during family dinner. Pulled out the acceptance letter I'd been carrying in my purse for 3 days, my hands trembling slightly as I unfolded it. "I've been accepted to the University of Texas Medical School. I'm going to become a doctor." The silence that followed felt like a physical presence at the table. Mom's fork hovered halfway to her mouth, a piece of enchilada balanced precariously on the edge. Dad set down his water glass with unusual care, the kind of deliberate movement people make when they're processing shocking information. Sophia recovered first, her marketing training kicking in with a diplomatic smile. "Wow, Alannis, that's really something. When did you even apply?" "Last year," I admitted. "I've been studying for the MCAT and working on applications for 18 months. 18 months? Mom's voice rose an octave. "You never said anything about medical school. Mia, you're 28 years old. Medical school is 4 years, then residency is another 3 to 4 years. You'd be 36 before you could even start practicing." The math hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus finally looked up from his phone, his expression mixing surprise with what I recognized as concern, the kind reserved for family members making questionable life choices. "Alannis," he said carefully, "have you really thought this through? Medical school is incredibly competitive and demanding. And the debt, it's astronomical. You'd be starting your career when most people are hitting their stride." Dad cleared his throat, always the practical one in family discussions. "What about the financial aspect? Medical school costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Do you have a plan for funding this?" I had prepared for these questions, but hearing them delivered with such gentle skepticism made my carefully rehearsed answers feel inadequate. "I've looked into loans and scholarships. I can work part-time during the first 2 years, part-time." Mom interrupted. "Mia, medical students don't work part-time. They barely have time to sleep." Sophia leaned forward, her voice taking on that careful tone she used with difficult clients. "I think what everyone's trying to say is that we want to make sure you've considered all the challenges. This isn't like your other career changes. Medicine is a lifetime commitment." The phrase "other career changes" stung because it reduced my various jobs to a pattern of instability rather than acknowledging them as survival while I figured out my true calling. They saw my retail positions and restaurant work as evidence of my inability to commit, not as the foundation that taught me resilience and how to work with all kinds of people. "I know it won't be easy," I said, my voice stronger now that their doubts were out in the open. "But I've wanted this for years. I just needed time to believe I could actually do it." Marcus set down his phone entirely, giving me his full attention for the first time in the conversation. "Look, I admire your ambition. I really do. But starting medical school at your age, It's not impossible, but it's not practical either. Maybe you could consider nursing or healthcare administration. Those are still medical fields, but more realistic given your timeline. The suggestions hit like small betrayals. They couldn't even imagine me succeeding at what I'd actually chosen, only at the lesser versions they deemed more appropriate for someone like me. The acceptance letter in my hand suddenly felt less like a victory and more like evidence of my family's inability to see who I was becoming. The rejection letter from Baylor College of Medicine arrived on a Tuesday morning in April, thin and formal in its dismissal. I had built up that school in my mind as the perfect fit close to home, excellent reputation, and a program that claimed to value diverse backgrounds. The letter was polite but final. While your application demonstrates dedication to pursuing medicine, we had an exceptionally competitive pool this year. I sat on my apartment steps reading it 3 times before the words fully sank in. This was supposed to be the easy acceptance, my safety school. If Baylor wouldn't take me, what hope did I have with the more prestigious programs still pending? The months leading up to that rejection had been a careful balance of secrecy and exhaustion. I was working double shifts at the medical center, cafeteria ironic considering my aspirations, and spending every free moment in the hospital's medical library. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, had grown accustomed to my presence in the corner table by the anatomy text, often staying past closing time to let me finish studying. My application process had been entirely self-funded and self-guided, while Marcus had hired a consultant for his law school applications, and Sophia had her professors writing glowing recommendations. I was navigating AMCAS forms alone at 2 a.m., cross-referencing requirements across dozens of schools. The family had no idea how consuming the process had become. They interpreted my exhaustion and preoccupation and signs that I was struggling with another dead-end job, not that I was pursuing the most challenging academic goal of my life. When I missed Marcus's birthday dinner because of a volunteer shift at the free clinic, Mom called to lecture me about priorities. "You can't keep using work as an excuse to avoid family," she said. "Marcus specifically asked for you to be there." I wanted to explain that my work was actually building clinical experience for medical school, that I was learning to take blood pressure and assist with basic procedures, but the truth felt too fragile to share. What if I didn't get accepted anywhere? What if they were right about my age and my impracticality? The CAT had been its own mountain to climb. My first attempt in January yielded a score that was decent but not competitive for the schools I dreamed of attending. I registered immediately for the April test, spending every spare dollar on prep materials and practice exams. The second attempt felt different, more confident, more prepared, but the waiting period stretched endlessly. When the improved score arrived, 516 out of 528, I actually cried in relief. It was competitive, maybe even impressive. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that medical school might actually happen, but the rejections kept coming. Johns Hopkins, Southwestern, Rice, Baylor, each thin envelope felt like a personal judgment on my worth and my timeline. The thick envelope from Texas State University Health Science Center arrived on a Friday afternoon when I was convinced that my medical school dreams were officially over. I almost didn't open it immediately, afraid it might be another polite dismissal. When I finally worked up the courage, the acceptance letter felt surreal. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected for admission to our Doctor of Medicine program, beginning August 2019. My hand shook as I read the financial aid package, the course requirements, the instructions for accepting my place in the incoming class. It wasn't Harvard or Baylor, but it was medical school. It was real. I called Mom first, my voice breaking as I tried to explain what the letter meant. "That's wonderful, Mia," she said, and I could hear her trying to inject enthusiasm into her voice. "Texas State has a good reputation. It's very practical." The word practical stung because I knew what she really meant. It was the school that accepted older, less traditional students. It wasn't prestigious enough to brag about at her book club or impress the neighbors, but it was respectable enough that she wouldn't have to make excuses. Dad's response was more encouraging, but tinged with worry about the financial commitment. Sophia sent a congratulations text with several exclamation points, though she called later to ask if I was sure about the debt I'd be taking on. Marcus's reaction surprised me the most. He actually seemed impressed by the acceptance, admitting that he'd looked up the school's statistics and realized how competitive their program was. I have to hand it to you, Alannis. I didn't think you'd actually get in anywhere. His honesty was refreshing, even as it revealed how little faith he'd had in my abilities. They were all adjusting to the reality that I'd done something they hadn't expected, something that required more dedication and intelligence than they credited me with having. The acceptance letter now sits framed in my office, not because it represents the most prestigious achievement, but because it represents the moment when I stopped letting other people's expectations define what was possible for my life. The birthday card arrived 3 weeks late, forwarded twice because my family had sent it to my old address above the bakery. Inside, Sophia had written, "Hope your first year is going well," in her careful handwriting, but the delayed delivery felt symbolic of how disconnected we'd become since I started medical school at 29. I was indeed the oldest student in my incoming class, a fact that became apparent during orientation week when my classmates discussed their gap years, backpacking through Europe, or their undergraduate research projects. Most had taken 1 or 2 years off after college. I'd have taken 7 years to find my calling, and the difference showed in ways both subtle and obvious. My study group consisted of brilliant 24-year-olds who can memorize the crepes, cycle over coffee, and discuss organic chemistry like a second language. They'd grown up expecting to become doctors. While I was still marveling at the fact that I belonged in the same lecture halls, their confidence was innate. Mine was hard-won and fragile. The academic demands were unlike anything I'd experienced. Anatomy lab meant spending hours with cadavers, learning every muscle, nerve, and blood vessel while the smell of formaldehyde clung to my clothes and hair. Biochemistry required understanding molecular processes at a level that made my old retail job seem like vacation. Pathology introduced me to diseases I'd never heard of, each with complex presentations and treatments. My family's understanding of this intensity was limited at best. When I missed Marcus's promotion celebration because of a histology exam the next morning, Mom called to express her disappointment. "It's just one test, Mia. Families should come first." "It's not just one test, Mom. If I fail histology, I could be kicked out of the program." "Don't be so dramatic. You're smart enough to pass without studying every single night." But they didn't. Understand that being smart enough wasn't sufficient when surrounded by the top 1% of college graduates, each hungry for success and accustomed to academic excellence. I wasn't just competing against my own limitations anymore. I was proving myself worthy of standing alongside students who'd been groomed for this path since childhood. The isolation became more pronounced during holidays. Thanksgiving of my first year, I brought biochemistry flashcards to dinner, trying to steal moments between courses to review metabolic pathways. Sophia noticed and made a comment about medical school making me antisocial. "Remember when Alannis used to be fun?" she said to Marcus, loud enough for me to hear. "Now she only talks about diseases and dead bodies. Christmas was worse." While my family exchanged gifts and shared stories from their successful year, I was mentally calculating how many hours I could study before returning to school. I'd been struggling with pharmacology, and the pressure to maintain my grades felt crushing. When Dad asked about my winter break plans, I mentioned spending time at the medical library. "The library will be closed, won't it?" Mom asked. "The medical library has extended hours, and I have access to online resources." The look they exchanged spoke volumes about their continued bewilderment at my chosen path. To them, winter break meant relaxation and family time. To me, it meant precious weeks to master material that could determine my future. My relationship with my siblings grew increasingly strained. Marcus would call occasionally, but our conversations felt forced. He'd ask about school in general terms, and I'd try to explain the complexity of what I was learning, but his attention would drift. He was making partner track at his firm and couldn't relate to being a student again, especially one whose success was measured in increments so small they seemed insignificant to outsiders. Sophia was more supportive in theory, but couldn't hide her frustration when I repeatedly declined social invitations. Her birthday party, a cousin's wedding, Multiple family barbecues, I missed them all for studying, clinical rotations, or simple exhaustion. She started planning events without even inviting me, assuming I'd decline anyway. The worst moment came during my second year when I couldn't attend my grandfather's funeral because I was in the middle of boards preparation. The decision tore me apart, but taking time off during this crucial period could have jeopardized my entire medical career. My family couldn't understand how I could prioritize studying over saying goodbye to Abuelo. He would have wanted you. There, Mom said over the phone, her voice thick with disappointment and grief. He would have wanted me to become a doctor, I replied, knowing it sounded cold but believing it was true. That conversation created a rift that took months to heal. They saw my absence as evidence that medical school was changing me into someone selfish and calculating. I saw it as the kind of sacrifice required to achieve something meaningful, the price of transforming myself from the family. Disappointment into someone worthy of respect. The irony was that during this period of familial isolation, I was discovering a sense of purpose and community I'd never experienced. My classmates became my chosen family, people who understood the unique pressures and rewards of medical training. We supported each other through failed exams, celebrated small victories, and created bonds forged in the shared crucible of becoming physicians. But my blood family couldn't see this transformation happening. All they could see was my absence from their lives, my preoccupation with a world they didn't understand, and my evolution into someone who prioritized medicine over family gatherings. They missed the part where I was finally becoming the person I was meant to be. My hospital ID badge from residency tells a story of transformation that goes beyond the smiling photo clipped to the plastic. Dr. Alannis Herrera, family medicine resident, it declares in bold letters, but it can't capture the exhaustion, exhilaration, and gradual confidence that came with wearing those credentials. Residency at 33 felt like being reborn to a world where I finally belonged. The 80-hour work weeks that would have seemed impossible in my previous life now felt like a privilege. I was learning to save lives, to comfort families in their worst moments, to make decisions that mattered in ways my retail jobs never had. Dr. Patricia Chen became my anchor during those grueling years. An attending physician in family medicine, she had a reputation for being tough but fair, the kind of mentor who pushed residents to their limits while providing unwavering support. She also happened to be a second career physician herself, having become a doctor at 35 after leaving a career in engineering. The older residents bring something special. She told me during one of our weekly check-ins, "You have life experience that your younger colleagues lack. Use it." Her words came back to me repeatedly during difficult cases. When I sat with a 40-year-old construction worker receiving a cancer diagnosis, my years of working with people from all walks of life helped me find the right words. When I explained complex medical conditions to worried families, my own experience of feeling lost and overwhelmed made me more patient and empathetic. But the demands of residency created an even wider chasm between me and my family. The holidays I missed during medical school seemed minor compared to the complete absence residency required. 80-hour weeks meant that even when I wasn't physically at the hospital, I was often mentally there, processing cases and preparing for the next day's challenges. Christmas of my intern year, I was on call and couldn't leave the hospital. Sophia sent photos from the family gathering Marcus's new girlfriend, Mom's elaborate dinner spread, Dad showing off his latest woodworking project. I was reviewing chest x-rays in the emergency department, drinking cold coffee and trying not to think about the tamales I was missing. "We saved you a plate." Mom texted with a photo of aluminum foil covering what I assumed was my favorite enchiladas. "Thank you." I typed back between patient charts, on my way to deliver a baby. Save room for dessert. But by the time I finished with the delivery, a beautiful, healthy girl born at 11:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve, the family gathering had ended and everyone had gone home. I ate my reheated enchiladas alone in the hospital cafeteria, surrounded by other residents and nurses who draw on holiday duty. My family's complaints about my absence evolved from disappointment to resignation. They stopped expecting me at birthday parties and graduations, planning around my absence rather than hoping for my presence. Marcus got engaged during my second year of residency, and I found out through a group text message sent after the family celebration dinner. Congratulations. I texted back immediately. Can't wait to meet her properly. You should come to Sunday dinner sometime, he replied. You know, when you're not saving the world. The sarcasm stung because it dismissed the importance of what I was doing. To them, my absence was a choice, a prioritization of work over family. They couldn't see that medicine wasn't just my job, it was my calling, my identity, the thing I waited 30 years to discover about myself. Sophia's approach was different but equally frustrating. She'd send cheerful updates about her life promotions, vacations, new relationships, with the subtext that she was living a balanced life while I was consumed by an unhealthy obsession. Her messages always ended with variations of, "Hope you're taking care of yourself," as if my dedication to medicine was inherently self-destructive. The most difficult conversation came during my third year when I decided to pursue a fellowship in geriatric medicine. The additional year of training meant extending my already lengthy absence from family life, and Mom couldn't hide her frustration when I broke the news. Another year, Alannis? When does this end? When do you get to have a real life? This is my real life, Mom. This is what I've always wanted. What about marriage? Children, you're 35 years old. The assumption that my medical career precluded other forms of fulfillment revealed how little they understood about my choices. They saw my dedication as sacrifice rather than passion, my focus as limitation rather than purpose. But inside the hospital walls, I was discovering exactly who I was meant to be. My patients didn't care that I'd started medical school later than my peers or that I'd worked retail jobs in my 20s. They cared that I listened carefully to their concerns, explained their conditions in understandable terms, and treated them with dignity regardless of their insurance status or background. Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly diabetic who spoke little English, became one of my regular patients during residency. Her family often accompanied her to appointments, translating when needed and asking detailed questions about her care. During one visit, her daughter pulled me aside. "Doctor, my mother says you're different from the other doctors. You don't rush her. You make her feel heard." That feedback meant more to me than any grade I'd received in medical school. It confirmed that my path to medicine, unconventional as it was, had prepared me to be the kind of doctor patients needed. My hospital ID badge from residency now sits in a drawer at home, replaced by my attending physician credentials. But I keep it as a reminder of those transformative years when I finally stopped apologizing for my late start and began embracing the unique perspective it gave me. Those years taught me that becoming a doctor wasn't just about acquiring medical knowledge. It was about learning to trust my instincts, advocate for my patients, and find confidence in the long journey that had brought me to medicine. My medical school diploma hangs in my office now, but I remember the weight of it in my hands that day in May, the embossed seal catching the light as I processed what I'd actually accomplished. Doctor of Medicine, summa cum laude, it proclaimed. In formal Latin script words that felt surreal even as I held the proof. The graduation ceremony took place in the university's largest auditorium, filled with families beaming with pride and new doctors trying to absorb the magnitude of their achievement. I scanned the audience until I found my family in the third row, all of them present for the first time in years. Mom had bought a new dress for the occasion, navy blue with small flowers, and Dad wore his best suit, the one usually reserved for weddings and funerals. Marcus sat between them, checking his phone intermittently, but making an obvious effort to be present. Sophia had driven in from Dallas, her camera ready to document the moment. When they called my name, Alannis Herrera, Doctor of Medicine, summa cum laude, I heard Mom gasp audibly from the audience. The summa cum laude designation was a surprise to them, though they'd missed the years of academic struggle that made it meaningful. They'd seen my absence from family events, but hadn't witnessed the study groups, the all-night cramming sessions, or the precise dedication required to graduate at the top of my class. Walking across that stage felt like vindication for every missed birthday party, every awkward family dinner where I'd been the odd one out, every conversation where they'd wondered aloud when I'd get serious about my life. The diploma represented more than academic achievement. It was proof that their former disappointment had transformed into something they could finally respect. The reception afterward was beautifully awkward. My family stood in a cluster, clearly proud but unsure how to reconcile this accomplished Dr. Herrera with the Alannis they'd worried about for so many years. Other families seemed more comfortable with their graduate's success, as if they'd always expected their children to become doctors. "We're so proud of you, Mia," Mom said, her eyes bright with tears she was trying not to shed. "Summa cum laude, what does that mean exactly?" "It means she was one of the top students in her class," Dr. Chen explained, having approached to congratulate me. Alannis was exceptional throughout her training. The validation from my mentor seemed to unlock something in my parents' understanding. They'd heard me talk about Dr. Chen for years, but had never met the woman who'd shaped my medical education. Seeing her speak about me with such respect made my achievements more real to them. Marcus surprised me with the sincerity of his congratulations. "I have to admit, I didn't think you'd make it through the first year," he said quietly while our parents talked to Dr. Chen. "Medical school seemed so ... unlikely for you back then." His honesty was refreshing rather than hurtful. It seemed unlikely to everyone, including myself at times. The woman who'd struggled through retail jobs and lived paycheck to paycheck hadn't appeared destined for academic excellence in one of the most demanding fields imaginable. "I almost didn't," I admitted. "There were plenty of times I wondered if you were all right about my age and my chances." Sophia joined our conversation, her voice full of genuine admiration. "I looked up summa cum laude while we were waiting. Only the top 5% of students earn that designation. You were literally one of the best in your entire class." The statistics seemed to impress her more than the diploma itself. Sophia understood competition and achievement in quantifiable terms, and learning that I'd outperformed 95% of my highly competitive classmates shifted her perception of my capabilities. Dad's reaction was the most touching. He approached me as the crowd was thinning, his expression more serious than celebratory. "Mia, I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "When you told us about medical school, I thought you were being impractical. I was afraid you'd fail and be worse off than before." "You were trying to protect me," I replied. "I understand that now." "No, I was projecting my own fears onto your dreams. I never took risks like this, never pursued something that seemed impossible. I was afraid because I couldn't imagine succeeding at something so ambitious." His admission revealed layers of family dynamics I'd never fully understood. Their discouragement hadn't just been about my age or my previous struggles, it had been about their own relationship with risk and ambition. They built comfortable, predictable lives and couldn't fathom deliberately choosing such an uncertain path. The diploma, in my hands, represented more than personal achievement. It symbolized a fundamental shift in how my family saw me and how I saw myself. For 32 years, I'd been the family member who couldn't quite get her life together. Now I was Dr. Herrera, a summa cum laude graduate preparing for residency at a respected hospital. As we left the auditorium, Mom linked her arm through mine. Something she hadn't done since I was a child. "Your grandfather would have been so proud," she said softly. "He always said you had something special, even when we couldn't see it." The mention of Abuelo brought tears I'd been holding back all day. He died during my second year of medical school, and I'd missed his funeral for board exams. The guilt had never fully faded, but Mom's words suggested that he would have understood my choice. That evening, my family took me to dinner at the nicest restaurant in town, the kind of place we'd only visited for special occasions when I was growing up. They asked thoughtful questions about residency, about my specialty choice, about my plans for the future. For the first time in years, I felt like a full member of the family rather than a problem to be solved or a disappointment to be managed. The diploma now serves as a daily reminder not just of what I achieved, but of the moment when everything changed between my family and me. It marks the end of one chapter, the uncertain years when they doubted my choices, and the beginning of another, where they finally saw me as the person I'd always been capable of becoming. The thank you note from Mrs. Patterson arrived 3 weeks after I'd helped her navigate her husband's cancer diagnosis. Written in shaky handwriting on floral stationery, it simply said, Dr. Herrera, you gave us hope when we had none. Thank you for seeing us as people, not just patients. I keep it tucked in my desk drawer, along with dozens of similar notes that remind me why I spent 7 years becoming a physician. Building my family medicine practice in Austin felt like coming home to myself. After completing residency and my geriatrics fellowship, I joined a multi-specialty clinic that served a diverse population, exactly the kind of environment where my unconventional path to medicine became an asset rather than a liability. My patient panel reflected the community I'd always been drawn to: working-class families, elderly patients with complex medical histories, young mothers navigating healthcare for the first time, and immigrants who needed a doctor who understood what it meant to feel like an outsider. My own years of struggle had taught me patience and empathy that couldn't be learned from textbooks. The awkwardness of my family during this period was different from the isolation of medical school and residency. They were proud of my achievement now, but they didn't quite know how to relate to Dr. Herrera. The title created an invisible barrier, as if my professional success had somehow elevated me beyond their reach. Family gatherings became exercises in navigating their newfound respect, mixed with lingering confusion about my choices. At Marcus's engagement party, distant relatives I barely knew approached me with medical questions, assuming that my degree made me available for free consultations at social events. "Alannis, can you look at this rash on my arm?" my cousin Elena asked, rolling up her sleeve in the middle of the cocktail hour. "You should really see a dermatologist for that," I replied diplomatically, trying to maintain boundaries while not seeming rude. Mom watched these interactions with a mixture of pride and bewilderment. She loved introducing me as my daughter, the doctor, but seemed surprised each time someone took the introduction seriously enough to seek medical advice. It was as if she hadn't fully processed that my title carried real authority and expertise. Sophia's relationship with my new status was particularly complex. As the family's former rising star, she struggled with the shift in dynamics that made me the most professionally accomplished sibling. Her marketing career was successful and well-respected, but doctoring carried a cultural weight that made family, friends, and neighbors treat me differently. "Do you miss having a normal schedule?" she asked during one of our rare coffee dates. "I mean, being on call and dealing with emergencies all the time must be exhausting." "I love what I do," I replied simply. "The schedule is part of it." Her question revealed her continued inability to understand that I wasn't making sacrifices for my career. I was living the life I'd always wanted. The on-call shifts, the complex cases, the emotional intensity of caring for sick patients weren't burdens to be endured, but privileges I'd fought years to earn. Marcus's approach was more straightforward. He treated my professional success like any other business achievement, discussing my practice with the same analytical framework he applied to his legal work. During a family barbecue, he asked detailed questions about patient volume, insurance, reimbursements, and practice management that showed he was taking my career seriously as an economic enterprise. "Have you considered specializing further?" he asked. "Seems like there's more money in cardiology or surgery." "I chose family medicine because I want to treat whole people, not just specific conditions," I explained. "The money isn't the point." His puzzled expression suggested that he still couldn't fully grasp choosing a career path based on passion rather than maximum financial return. But he was trying to understand, which was more than he'd done during my training years. My practice began attracting patients through word-of-mouth recommendations, particularly among families who appreciated my communication style and willingness to spend extra time explaining complex diagnoses. Mrs. Chun, an 80-year-old Taiwanese immigrant, became one of my most loyal patients after I took the time to understand her cultural concerns about medication and worked with her family to develop a treatment plan that respected her preferences. "She trusts you," her daughter told me after one particularly challenging appointment. "She says you listen like her doctors in Taiwan used to listen before medicine became so rushed." These connections with patients validated my decision to pursue medicine later in life. The years I'd spent working with people from different backgrounds, the financial struggles that taught me empathy for those worried about medical bills, the patience I developed from my own long journey to finding my calling, all of it made me a better doctor than I might have been if I'd followed a traditional path. The first time a medical colleague referred to me as an expert was during a case consultation about an elderly patient with multiple chronic conditions, Dr. Williams, an internist with 20 years of experience, called to discuss medication interactions and asked my opinion on managing the patient's complex care needs. "You've got a reputation for being excellent with geriatric patients," he said. "Mind taking a look at this case?" That reputation felt earned in ways that had nothing to do with my age when I started medical school. It grew from genuine expertise, careful attention to detail, and a commitment to treating each patient as a whole person, rather than a collection of symptoms. My family slowly began to understand that I hadn't just achieved a professional title, I found my true calling. The thank you notes from patients, the complex cases that challenged and fulfilled me, the sense of purpose that permeated everything I did. All of it demonstrated that becoming Dr. Herrera wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about becoming exactly who I was meant to be, regardless of how long it took to get there. Sophia's text messages arrived in rapid succession at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, each one more frantic than the last. I was reviewing patient charts for the next day's appointments when my phone started buzzing insistently on my desk. "Alannis, are you awake? I need to ask you something medical. I know it's late, but I'm kind of freaking out. Can you call me, please?" The progression from casual inquiry to barely controlled panic was evident even through text. I set aside Mrs. Rodriguez's diabetes management plan and called my sister immediately. "Thank God," Sophia answered on the first ring, her voice tight with anxiety. I didn't know who else to call. "What's going on?" "I've been having these weird symptoms for months, and I finally saw a doctor, but he just ordered more tests and didn't really explain anything. I'm scared, Alannis." The vulnerability in her voice was startling. Sophia had always been the family member with answers, the one who managed crises with calm efficiency. Hearing her sound lost and frightened reminded me of how young she'd been when I started medical school, still in college, and convinced of her own invincibility. "Tell me what's happening," I said, switching into my professional mode while trying to maintain the warmth of a concerned sister. "It started with fatigue, but not normal tired. Like exhausted after walking up one flight of stairs. Then my joints started hurting, my hands, my knees, my shoulders, and I've been getting these rashes on my face and arms that come and go." As she described her symptoms, I found myself mentally running through differential diagnoses. The combination of fatigue, joint pain, and rashes suggested several possibilities, some more concerning than others. But I also noticed something else in her voice. Relief at finally having someone who could understand the medical terminology and implications. "How long has this been going on?" "About 6 months. At first, I thought it was just stress from work. You know how crazy things have been with the agency. But it's gotten worse, and now I have this appointment with a rheumatologist next week, and I don't even know what a rheumatologist does." The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, Sophia had been the family member with all the answers, the one who researched everything thoroughly and approached problems with confidence. Now she was calling the sister she'd once viewed as directionless, seeking expertise she couldn't Google her way to understanding. "A rheumatologist specializes in autoimmune and inflammatory conditions," I explained gently. "Based on what you're describing, that's a smart referral. Have you had any blood work done?" "Yes, but I don't understand the results. Something about an NA and ESR and a bunch of other letters. The doctor said some numbers were elevated, but wouldn't tell me what that means until we get more tests." I could hear her frustration with the medical system's tendency to withhold information until all the pieces were in place. Having been on both sides of that dynamic, I understood why doctors were cautious about preliminary interpretations, but I also knew how terrifying the uncertainty could be for patients. "Can you send me copies of the lab results? I can help you understand what they mean while you're waiting for the rheumatologist." "Really? You'd do that?" Her surprise stung a little. Of course I'd help her. Despite our complicated relationship over the years, she was my sister, and she was scared. The fact that she'd even called me represented a significant shift in how she viewed my expertise. Of course, Send me whatever you have, and we can go through it together. Within minutes, my phone chimed with photos of lab reports, imaging results, and doctor's notes. Sophia had been thorough in documenting her medical journey, photographing every piece of paper from her various appointments. As I scrolled through the results, a picture began to emerge that was both concerning and treatable. Her NA was indeed positive with a homogeneous pattern. Her inflammatory markers were elevated, and she had complement levels that suggested possible lupus or another connective tissue disorder. None of it was definitively diagnostic yet, but it explained her symptoms and validated her concerns that something significant was happening. Okay, I said, choosing my words carefully. The good news is that these results help explain why you've been feeling awful. The concerning news is that they suggest your immune system is attacking your own tissues, which is what autoimmune diseases do. Autoimmune? Like what kind of diseases? There are several possibilities, but lupus is one that fits your symptoms and lab results. But, Sophia, even if that's what this is, it's very treatable now. The medications available are so much better than they were even 10 years ago. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Sophia, I'm here. I'm just processing. Lupus sounds so serious. It can be serious if it's not treated, but with proper management, most people with lupus live completely normal lives. And we don't even know for sure that's what this is yet. The rheumatologist will be able to give you much more specific information. As we talk through her concerns and questions, I realized this was the longest medical conversation I'd ever had with a family member. For years, they'd asked me casual questions about minor ailments, but this was different. Sophia needed my expertise in a way that was both professional and deeply personal. Alannis, can I ask you something else? Of course. Are you glad I called you? I mean, I know we haven't been close lately. I wasn't sure if you'd want to get involved in my medical stuff. The question revealed how much distance had grown between us during my medical training. She wasn't just asking for medical advice. She was testing whether our relationship could include this kind of vulnerability and support. I'm glad you called, I said honestly. And I want you to keep calling if you have questions or need someone to help you navigate this. That's what family does. Even family that thought you were crazy for going to medical school at 28. Her attempt at humor carried genuine remorse. We both knew that her call represented more than seeking medical advice. It was an acknowledgement that I'd become someone worth turning to in a crisis. Someone whose expertise and judgment could be trusted with something precious. Especially that family, I replied. Besides, it turns out that crazy 28-year-old knew what she was doing after all. Sophia's medical records told a story of frustration that had become all too familiar in modern healthcare. The thick folder she brought to my office contained visits to 3 different primary care physicians, 2 urgent care centers, and an emergency room, all seeking answers for symptoms that had been progressively worsening over 8 months. I feel like I'm going crazy, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. Half the doctors act like it's stress. The other half order tests but won't explain what they're looking for. I spread her lab results and imaging studies across my desk, creating a timeline of her medical journey. The pattern was clear to me now, but I could see how it had been missed or minimized by physicians who saw her for brief visits without the luxury of extensive follow-up. You're not going crazy, I said firmly. Look at these trends. I showed her how her inflammatory markers had steadily increased over the past 6 months, how her complement levels had dropped, and how her NA pattern had become more pronounced. Each result in isolation might seem borderline or insignificant, but together they painted a clear picture of systemic autoimmune disease. The first doctor told me my fatigue was probably depression, Sophia said, pointing to notes from a visit in January. He prescribed antidepressants without even examining me thoroughly. That happens more often than it should, especially with young women, I admitted. Fatigue and joint pain get dismissed as psychological symptoms far too frequently. The misdiagnoses represented more than medical oversight. They reflected the challenges patients face when their symptoms don't fit neat diagnostic categories. or when their presentations are subtle rather than dramatic. Sophia's symptoms had been real and progressive, but because she appeared healthy and articulated her concerns calmly, several physicians have failed to take them seriously. "When did you first notice the rash?" I asked, examining photos she'd taken of the butterfly-shaped discoloration across her cheeks. "March, I think. It was subtle at first, just some redness after being in the sun. But then it started happening even indoors, and it would last for days." The malar rash was classic for lupus, but I could see how it might have been attributed to allergies or cosmetic reactions by doctors who weren't looking for autoimmune disease. Combined with her other symptoms and lab results, though, it completed a diagnostic picture that was increasingly clear. "Sophia, based on everything I'm seeing here, I think you likely have systemic lupus erythematosus alzheimer's. But I want to be very clear that this is treatable, manageable, and doesn't have to define your life." She sat quietly for a moment, processing the diagnosis she probably suspected, but hoped to avoid. "Lupus?" she said finally. "That's what you thought from the beginning, isn't it?" "It was on my differential, yes. But I needed to see all of this documentation to be more confident. What does this mean for my life, my work? Can I still travel? Have children someday?" The questions tumbled out, reflecting fears she'd probably been harboring for months. I recognized the anxiety of someone whose future had suddenly become uncertain, whose body had revealed itself to be less reliable than she'd always assumed. "It means you'll need to work with a rheumatologist to find the right medication regimen, probably including immunosuppressants and anti-inflammatory drugs. You'll need regular monitoring and blood work. You might have flares where symptoms worsen temporarily, but most people with lupus live completely normal lives." I pulled up some recent studies on my computer, showing her 5- and 10-year outcomes. For patients with early diagnosed SLE, the data was reassuring. With proper treatment, most patients maintained their quality of life and could pursue careers, relationships, and families just like anyone else. "The key is early detection and appropriate treatment," I continued. "You actually have an advantage because we're catching this relatively early in the disease process. Would I have been diagnosed sooner if I'd come to you first?" The question hung between us, loaded with implications about family dynamics and missed opportunities. I chose my words carefully, not wanting to criticize her previous physicians while acknowledging the reality of what had happened. "Maybe," I said honestly, "but Sophia, you couldn't have known to come to me for this. Until recently, I was just your sister who was always studying. You didn't think of me as someone who could help with serious medical problems." She laughed, but it was tinged with regret. "That's true. Even after you became a doctor, I still thought of you as, I don't know, not a real doctor somehow, not someone I'd turn to for important things." Her admission revealed the strange cognitive dissonance that had affected my entire family. They'd celebrated my graduation and residency completion, but hadn't fully internalized that I possessed real expertise that could benefit them. I was Dr. Herrera in professional settings, but still just Alannis when family problems arose. "I understand that," I said. "It takes time for everyone to adjust to new roles within families. I'm sorry I didn't take you seriously before this. I mean, I knew you were smart and accomplished, but I didn't really get what that meant until I needed it myself." I reviewed her upcoming rheumatology appointment, helping her prepare questions and explaining what to expect from the consultation. I also gave her my recommendations for lifestyle modifications, sun protection, stress management, regular exercise within her limitations that could help manage her symptoms between now and when her treatment plan was established. "Can I ask you something personal?" Sophia said as we wrapped up our review. "Of course. Do you ever feel bitter about how we treated you when you said you wanted to go to medical school?" Looking back, we were pretty awful about it. I considered the questions seriously. There had been moments during my training when their lack of support had felt crushing, when I'd wondered if achieving my goals would be worth the family relationships it might cost. Sometimes I admitted, but I also understand why you reacted that way. My path didn't make sense to any of you because it was so different from what you expected or understood. But you were right and we were wrong. I was right about what I needed to do with my life. You were wrong about what I was capable of achieving, but you weren't wrong to be concerned about the challenges I'd face. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. I think I'm starting to understand why you missed so many family events during school and residency. This stuff is complicated and important in ways I never appreciated. It was hard to be absent from family life, I said, but becoming a doctor required that level of commitment. I couldn't do it halfway. As she gathered her medical records and prepared to leave, Sophia paused at the door. Alannis, thank you for this. Not just for helping me understand the medical stuff, but for being so patient with me after everything. You're my sister. This is what family does for each other. Even family that thought you were too old for medical school. Especially that family, I replied, echoing our conversation from the night she'd first called. After she left, I sat in my office thinking about the strange turns that life takes. 6 months ago, Sophia had been the successful sister with her. Life figured out while I was still proving myself as a new attending physician. Now she was facing a chronic illness that would require careful management, and I was the family member with the expertise to help her navigate it. The irony wasn't lost on me that my family's health crises were becoming the bridge that reconnected us after years of distance. They were finally seeing me not just as Dr. Herrera in the abstract, but as someone whose knowledge and skills can make a real difference in their lives, but more than professional validation. Sophia's visit represented something deeper, the beginning of authentic relationships built on mutual respect rather than old patterns of family hierarchy. For the first time since starting medical school, I felt like I was truly part of the family again, not as a struggling younger sister they worried about, but as an equal whose voice carried weight and whose expertise had value. The thick folder of medical records Sophia had carried into my office represented months of frustration and fear, but it also represented the moment when everything changed between us, when she stopped seeing me as the family member who couldn't get her life together and started seeing me as the doctor who could help her navigate one of the most challenging diagnoses of her life. The emergency room discharge papers arrived by text message at 6:30 a.m., accompanied by a brief note from Marcus. Turns out it wasn't a heart attack. Can we talk when you have time? The casual tone couldn't hide the significance of what had happened. My supremely confident brother had been scared enough to call an ambulance in the middle of the night. I called him immediately, knowing that Marcus wouldn't have reached out unless he was genuinely shaken by whatever had happened. Hey, he answered on the second ring, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. Are you okay? What happened? I woke up around 2 a.m. with chest pain and couldn't breathe. Felt like someone was sitting on my chest. Jennifer drove me to the ER thinking I was having a heart attack. Marcus was 36, in good physical shape, and had no family history of heart disease. But chest pain was always taken seriously, especially in someone experiencing it for the first time. I could only imagine how terrifying those hours in the emergency room must have been for him and his fiancée. What did the workup show? EKG was normal. Cardiac enzymes were normal. Chest X-ray was clear. They did some other stress test. I think everything came back fine. I could hear relief mixed with confusion in his voice. Being told you're not having a heart attack is obviously good news, but it leaves the question of what actually caused such frightening symptoms. Did they give you a diagnosis? The doctor said it was probably a panic attack, but that doesn't make sense. I don't have panic attacks. I handle stress fine. I've been practicing law for 8 years. His resistance to the diagnosis was understandable. Marcus had built his identity around being unflappable under pressure. The person who thrived in high-stakes situations and never let emotions interfere with performance. Accepting that he'd had a panic attack would mean acknowledging vulnerability. He never allowed himself to feel. Can you tell me more about what's been going on lately? Work stress, life changes, anything unusual? There was a long pause before he answered. Things have been intense at the firm. We're up for a major partnership decision this year, and I've been working 80-hour weeks trying to prove myself. Jennifer and I are planning the wedding, buying a house, and my caseload is heavier than it's ever been. As he described his recent months, I began to see the perfect storm of stressors that had culminated in his emergency room visit. Partnership pressure, major life transitions, financial commitments, and the kind of work schedule that left no time for processing or decompression. Have you been having trouble sleeping? Changes in appetite? Feeling on edge or irritable? How did you know that? Jennifer's been saying I'm more snappy lately, and I've been waking up at 4 a.m. thinking about cases. But that's just dedication, right? That's what it takes to make partner. I recognize the symptoms of chronic stress and anxiety, the kind that builds gradually until it manifests as physical symptoms dramatic enough to send someone to the emergency room. Marcus had been pushing his nervous system beyond its limits without recognizing the warning signs. Marcus, panic attacks don't mean you're weak or that you can't handle stress. They're actually pretty common among high-achieving professionals. Your body was telling you that something needs to change. But I've handled pressure before. I got through law school, passed the bar, built my practice. Why would I suddenly start having panic attacks now? Sometimes our coping mechanisms work, until they don't. You've been pushing yourself harder and harder, and eventually something gives. The good news is that this is very treatable. I spent the next 20 minutes explaining anxiety and stress management, recommending techniques he could implement immediately and suggesting he consider talking to someone about the pressure he'd been under. Marcus listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes like he was preparing for a case. "Can I ask you something?" he said as our conversation was winding down. "Of course. Do you think this would have happened if I talked to you earlier? I mean, about the stress and the sleep problems?" It was the second time in recent weeks that a family member had asked whether coming to me sooner might have prevented a medical crisis. The pattern suggested they were beginning to see me as a resource they'd overlooked for years. "Maybe we could have caught the warning signs earlier," I said. "But Marcus, you didn't think to call me because, until recently, none of you really thought of me as someone who could help with serious problems. That's not fair to you, is it? I mean, you're a doctor. A really good one, from what I hear around town. But I still think of you as my little sister who couldn't figure out her life." His honesty was refreshing and painful at the same time. Even after my graduation, residency, and establishing a successful practice, my family still carry old perceptions that prevented them from seeing my current reality. "It takes time for family dynamics to change," I said. "I understand that. Well, I'm changing mine starting now. Can you recommend someone for me to talk to about managing stress? And maybe help me figure out how to scale back at work without tanking my partnership chances?" Over the following weeks, Marcus implemented the stress management techniques we discussed and started seeing a therapist who specialized in high-achieving professionals. His panic attacks stopped, his sleep improved, and he began setting better boundaries at work. More importantly, our relationship shifted in ways I hadn't expected. Marcus started calling me regularly, not just for medical advice, but for perspective on work-life balance and handling pressure. He discovered that his sister, the doctor, had insights that went beyond medical knowledge, that my own journey through uncertainty and career challenges had given me wisdom he could use. The emergency room discharge papers now sit in Marcus's file in my home office, not because I'm treating him professionally, but because they represent the moment when he stopped seeing me as his directionless little sister and started seeing me as someone whose expertise in life experience could help him navigate his own challenges. His panic attack had been a wake-up call about more than just stress management. It had shown him that success without balance isn't sustainable, and that sometimes the people we least expect to have answers are exactly the ones we need to ask. The medication bottles were hidden in the back of Mom's linen closet, behind towels and extra sheets where she thought no one would find them. I discovered them by accident while helping her organize during a weekend visit, my hand closing around. Prescription bottles that rattled with the sound of secrets, kept too long. Metformin, lisinopril, atorvastatin. I read aloud, holding the bottles up for her to see. "Mom, how long have you been taking these?" Her face crumpled with the exhaustion of someone who'd been carrying a burden alone for too long. She sank onto the edge of her bed, suddenly looking older than her 62 years. About 2 years, she admitted quietly. Maybe a little longer. The medications told a story I wished she'd shared with me sooner. Metformin for diabetes, lisinopril for high blood pressure, atorvastatin for cholesterol management, a constellation of conditions. That suggested her health had been deteriorating while she maintained the facade of being fine. Mom, why didn't you tell us? And why are you hiding your medications? I didn't want to worry anyone. You all have your own lives, your own problems. Sophia's dealing with her diagnosis. Marcus has been so stressed with work. I didn't want to add to it. Her reasoning revealed the complex dynamics of family caretaking. How parents often sacrifice their own needs to protect their children from worry, even when those children are fully grown adults capable of providing support. When were you diagnosed with diabetes? Last year, Dr. Martinez said my A1C was too high and put me on medication. But the pills make me feel sick sometimes, so I don't always take them. My medical training kicked in immediately, recognizing the dangerous cycle of poor medication, compliance that could lead to serious complications. But underneath my professional concern was a deeper hurt. My mother had been managing chronic illness alone while I was building a practice dedicated to helping people navigate exactly these kinds of health challenges. Mom, diabetes is serious. Skipping medications can cause complications with your heart, kidneys, eyes, and circulation. Have you been monitoring your blood sugar? She gestured vaguely toward her dresser. I have one of those machines, but I don't really understand what the numbers mean. I found the glucometer buried under jewelry and old photos. Its memory showing sporadic readings that painted a picture of poor diabetes control. Her blood sugars were running consistently high, indicating that her current medication regimen wasn't sufficient or that she wasn't taking it consistently. These numbers are concerning, I said gently. You need better blood sugar control, and you need to take your medications as prescribed. But they make me feel awful. The metformin upsets my stomach, and the blood pressure medicine makes me dizzy. Her complaints were common side effects that could often be managed with dosage adjustments, different formulations, or timing changes. But she'd been suffering in silence rather than working with her doctor to find solutions. Have you talked to Dr. Martinez about the side effects? I mentioned it, but he just said they were normal and I'd get used to them. He's always so rushed during appointments. I don't want to be a bother. The revelation that my mother felt like a bother when seeking health care made my heart ache. She'd spent decades advocating for her children, ensuring we got the medical care we needed, but couldn't advocate for herself with the same determination. Mom, you're never a bother when it comes to your health. These side effects can be managed, but you have to speak up about them. I spent the next hour reviewing her medications, explaining how each one worked and why it was important for her long-term health. I showed her how to properly use her glucometer and helped her create a medication schedule that might minimize side effects. Why didn't you come to me when you were first diagnosed? I asked as we organized her medications into a weekly pill. Container dot, she was quiet for a long moment, arranging pills with the careful attention of someone trying to find the right words. Because you're my daughter, she said finally. I'm supposed to take care of you, not the other way around. Mom, I'm also a doctor. This is what I do for a living. I know that. I'm proud of that. But when I look at you, I still see my little girl who used to bring me dandelions and insist they were flowers. It's hard to ask your child for help, even when that child is Dr. Herrera. Her words revealed the fundamental challenge of family relationships when professional and personal roles intersect. She could intellectually acknowledge my expertise, while emotionally struggling to reverse the caretaking dynamic that had defined our relationship for 30-plus years. I understand that it feels strange, I said. But Mom, I want to help you. Let me be your daughter and your doctor when you need medical support. Over the following weeks, I worked with Mom to optimize her diabetes management. We scheduled an appointment with an endocrinologist I trusted, adjusted her medication timing to minimize side effects, and established a routine for blood sugar monitoring that made sense for her lifestyle. More importantly, we began having regular conversations about her health that weren't secretive or shameful. She started sending me her weekly blood sugar logs. asking questions about symptoms, and treating our chronic illness is something to be managed rather than hidden. But hidden medication bottles became a turning point in our relationship. They forced us to confront the reality that she was aging and developing health problems that required ongoing attention. But they also allowed me to step into a new role within our family, not just as the daughter who'd finally gotten her life together, but as someone whose expertise could genuinely improve the lives of the people I loved most. Mom's diabetes became well controlled within 3 months of proper management and medication compliance. Her energy improved, her mood stabilized, and she stopped experiencing the fatigue and irritability that had been affecting her quality of life for years. But the most significant change was in how she viewed asking for help. She learned that turning to me for medical guidance wasn't a reversal of our parent-child relationship, but an evolution of one where we could care for each other in ways that honored both our history and our current capabilities. Dad's old medical school application was yellowed with age, tucked between insurance documents and tax returns in the filing cabinet he'd asked me to help organize. The letterhead read, University of Texas Medical School, Class of 1985 application, and seeing his careful handwriting on the personal statement made my breath catch. Dad, you applied to medical school? He looked up from the box of papers he'd been sorting, his expression cycling through surprise, embarrassment, and resignation. A long time ago, he said quietly, before you kids were born, before life got complicated. I held the application like a fragile artifact, trying to reconcile this evidence of his abandoned dreams with the man who questioned my decision to pursue medicine at 28. His personal statement was passionate and articulate, describing a calling to serve underserved communities and make healthcare accessible to working-class families. What happened? Why didn't you go? Dad set down the papers he'd been holding and sat heavily in his desk chair, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. Your mother got pregnant with Marcus, and we weren't married yet. My father needed help with the family business. You remember the auto shop on 5th Street? Medical school seemed like a luxury we couldn't afford when there were immediate responsibilities to handle. The timeline clicked into place in my mind. Dad would have been 22 when Marcus was conceived, the same age when most people are just beginning to consider their life paths seriously. The weight of unexpected parenthood and family obligations had derailed his medical aspirations before they could fully form. Did you ever regret not going? He was quiet for so long that I wondered if he'd heard the question. When he finally spoke, his voice carried decades of carefully managed disappointment. Every time I drove past the medical center, every time someone mentioned becoming a doctor, every time one of my customers talked about medical bills they couldn't afford. He paused, looking directly at me, and especially when you announced you wanted to go to medical school. The admission hit me like a physical blow. All those years when he discouraged my medical aspirations, when he talked about being practical and realistic, he'd been projecting his own abandoned dreams onto my future. Is that why you were so against it when I told you about applying? Partly, he admitted. I was afraid you'd fail, which would prove that the dream was impossible for our family. But I was also afraid you'd succeed, which would prove that I could have done it too if I'd been braver. His honesty was devastating and liberating at the same time. For years, I'd internalized his doubts about my medical school plans as evidence that I was being unrealistic. Learning that his opposition came from his own regrets rather than genuine concerns about my abilities reframed every conversation we'd had about my future. Dad, you weren't less brave. You made the responsible choice with the information you had at the time. Maybe, but I've spent 40 years wondering what if. What if I'd found a way to make medical school work? What if I'd been willing to take on debt or delay starting the family? What if I'd believed in myself the way you believed in yourself? I thought about his life choices, the successful auto repair business he'd built, the stable middle class lifestyle he'd provided for our family, the community respect he'd earned through decades of honest work and community involvement. He created a good life, but it wasn't the life he'd originally envisioned for himself. You built something meaningful with your choices, I said. You provided for our family, created jobs for other people, served your community. That matters. I know it does. and I'm proud of what I accomplished. But seeing you pursue medicine, especially when everyone said you were too old, brought back all those feelings of wondering what might have been. His medical school application revealed dreams that paralleled mine in unexpected ways. He'd written about wanting to serve Spanish-speaking patients who struggled with language barriers in healthcare settings. He described growing up in a working-class family where medical care was often delayed or avoided due to cost. His motivations were strikingly similar to what had drawn me to family medicine. Your personal statement sounds like something I could have written, I told him. That's probably not a coincidence. We grew up in similar circumstances, saw similar problems in our community. The difference is that you had the courage to pursue the solution, even when it seemed impossible. Reading his application, I understood for the first time why my path to medicine had been so emotionally charged for our family. It wasn't just about my individual success or failure, it was about redemption for abandoned dreams, proof that our family's aspirations didn't have to be limited by circumstances. I'm sorry I didn't support you more enthusiastically from the beginning, Dad continued. When you said you wanted to go to medical school, I should have been excited that someone in our family was going to achieve what I'd given up on. You were protecting me from disappointment the way you'd protected yourself. Maybe, but I was also protecting myself from hope. If I got excited about your medical school plans and you didn't make it, it would have confirmed that the dream was unrealistic for people like us. The conversation revealed layers of family psychology I'd never fully understood. My parents' initial resistance to my medical school plans hadn't just been about my age or my previous career struggles. It had been about their own relationship with ambition and risk-taking. Are you proud of what I've accomplished? I asked, needing to hear his answer. Prouder than I can express, he said immediately. Not just because you became a doctor, but because you proved that it's never too late to pursue what you're meant to do. You did what I couldn't do, you took the risk. As we finished organizing his papers, Dad insisted on keeping his old medical school application visible in his file cabinet rather than throwing it away. Why keep it? I asked. Because it reminds me that dreams don't have expiration dates. I may not have become a doctor, but my daughter did. And maybe that's how some dreams are meant to work. They get passed down until someone in the family has the circumstances and courage to make them real. His revelation transformed my understanding of our family dynamics and my own journey to medicine. I hadn't just been pursuing my individual calling. I'd been carrying forward a dream that had lived in our family for decades, waiting for the right person at the right time to make it reality. The yellowed medical school application now sits framed in Dad's office, not as a reminder of failure, but as evidence that some dreams are bigger than any individual life. Patient. Enough to wait for the next generation to carry them forward. The group text thread started innocuously enough with Mom asking if I could look at a mole that had changed color. But within hours, it had evolved into a medical consultation free-for-all that would have been unimaginable just months earlier. Alannis, can you tell me if this rash looks serious? Sophia added, followed immediately by a close-up photo that made me grateful for modern smartphone image quality. While we're at it, my knee has been clicking when I walk upstairs, Marcus chimed in. Is that something I should worry about? And I've been having these headaches every afternoon around 3 p.m. Dad added to the growing list of ailments suddenly requiring my expert opinion. I stared at my phone in amazement. The same family members who questioned my medical school ambitions were now treating me like their personal physician on retainer. The transformation was complete, and slightly overwhelming. Sunday dinner that week felt like entering an alternate reality. Instead of asking about my work in polite, general terms, everyone arrived with specific medical questions and symptoms they wanted discussed. Mom had printed out articles from health websites that she wanted me to interpret. Sophia brought her latest lab results from the rheumatologist. Marcus had researched his knee clicking and wanted my opinion on his self-diagnosis. Okay, everyone slow down, I said as we settled around the dining table. I'm happy to help with medical questions, but maybe we can establish some boundaries about when and how we discuss these things. Why boundaries? Mom asked, genuinely confused. You're a doctor, and we're your family. Isn't this what families do? The question revealed how completely their perception of me had shifted. For years, they'd struggled to see me as a real doctor despite my credentials and training. Now they seemed to expect me to be available for medical consultations whenever the need arose. Because I'm your daughter and sister first, I explained. And because some medical issues require proper examinations and formal consultations, not dinner table discussions. Sophia looked slightly hurt. But you helped me understand my lupus diagnosis. I thought you wanted to be involved in our health decisions. I do want to be involved when it's appropriate. But there's a difference between helping you understand a diagnosis and becoming your primary care physician by default. Marcus, ever the lawyer, appreciated the need for clear guidelines. So what would be appropriate to ask you, and what should we handle through our regular doctors? I thought carefully about how to maintain family relationships while protecting my professional boundaries and ensuring everyone received proper medical care. Emergency situations, help understanding diagnoses or treatment plans, general health. Questions, those are all fine to discuss with me. But if you need prescriptions, ongoing treatment, or formal medical evaluations, you should see your own physicians. Dad nodded approvingly. That makes sense. We don't want to put you in an uncomfortable position. It's not about being uncomfortable, I clarified. It's about making sure you get the best care possible. Sometimes being too close to a situation makes it harder to be objective. As dinner progressed, the conversation revealed just how dramatically our family dynamics had changed. They asked thoughtful questions about my practice, showed genuine interest in the complex cases I was handling, and treated my professional expertise with a respect that had been completely absent during my training years. Can I say something? Sophia asked during a lull in the conversation. I've been thinking about how we treated you when you first said you wanted to go to medical school. The table grew quiet. Everyone suddenly focused on their enchiladas. We were horrible, she continued, not just unsupportive, but actively discouraging. And now here we are, asking for your medical advice every 5 minutes. Marcus set down his fork, his expression serious. Sophia's right. We owe you an apology for not believing in you from the beginning. You don't owe me anything, I said. Though their acknowledgement meant more than they probably realized. Yes, we do, Mom said firmly. We should have supported your dreams instead of questioning them. We should have been proud of your ambition instead of worried about your practicality. Dad reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We were wrong about your age, wrong about your capabilities, and wrong about what you could achieve. I'm sorry it took us so long to see who you really are. Their apologies were sincere and healing, but they also highlighted the strange journey our family had taken. They'd gone from seeing me as the perpetual disappointment to viewing me as the family's medical expert, sometimes to an extent that felt overwhelming. I appreciate the apologies, I said, but I also need you to understand that I don't want to be valued just because I became a doctor. I want to be valued as a person with or without the medical degree. Sophia looked confused. Of course, we value you as a person, but the medical degree is a huge accomplishment. Why wouldn't we be excited about that? Being excited is different from only seeing me through the lens of my profession. I'm still the same person who worked in retail and lived above a bakery. The medical degree didn't erase that history or make it less important. The conversation that followed was one of the most honest we'd ever had as a family. We talked about the years of distance during my training, the missed family events that had hurt everyone's feelings, and the gradual rebuilding of relationships based on mutual respect rather than old patterns of hierarchy. I think we're all still figuring out how to be family now that everyone's grown up and successful in different ways, Marcus said thoughtfully. And now that Alannis can tell us whether our weird symptoms are worth worrying about, Sophia added. With a grin, the group text thread continued after dinner, but with better boundaries and more appropriate requests. Instead of sending random photos of concerning body parts, family members started asking for recommendations for specialists, help understanding medical terminology, and guidance on when symptoms warranted professional attention. More importantly, our conversations expanded beyond medical topics. They asked about my personal life, my goals for my practice, and my thoughts on subjects unrelated to healthcare. I was finally being seen as a complete person rather than just the family member with medical expertise. The family reckoning represented more than acknowledgement of past mistakes or current accomplishments. It marked the beginning of adult relationships, based on who we all were now rather than who we'd been during our childhood years. They could finally see me as Dr. Herrera without forgetting that I was also just Alannis, their daughter and sister who'd taken an unconventional path to find her calling. The group text thread, notifications still make me smile when they appear on my phone. Each message represents a family member who trusts my judgment, values my expertise, and sees me as someone worth turning to when they need help. After years of feeling like the family outsider, I finally found my place as the person they called when medical questions arose, not because I was the only doctor they knew, but because I was their doctor, their daughter and sister who happened to understand the complexities of healthcare in ways that could benefit the people I loved most. The email from the Journal of Medical Education arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing patient charts. We are pleased to inform you that your manuscript, Late Career Medical Students, Outcomes and Contributions in Primary Care, has been accepted for publication in our upcoming issue on non-traditional medical education pathways. I read the acceptance letter 3 times before the reality sank in. My research on older medical students born from my own experience and the unique perspectives I'd observed in myself and similar classmates was going to be published in a peer-reviewed journal. The study had grown from a personal curiosity into a comprehensive analysis of how age and life experience affected medical education outcomes. I'd tracked down classmates from my medical school cohort, surveyed practicing physicians who'd started medical school after age 25, and analyzed performance data across multiple metrics. The results had surprised even me. Late career medical students consistently outperformed their younger peers in patient communication, empathy scores, and long-term career satisfaction. They were more likely to choose primary care specialties, more likely to practice in underserved areas, and less likely to experience burnout during residency training. "Hey, Dr. Herrera, congratulations on the publication," called Dr. Rodriguez. From down the hallway, word had spread quickly through the clinic about my upcoming journal article, and colleagues were stopping by to offer their support. "Thank you," I replied, still processing the professional validation the publication represented. I'm excited to see if it generates discussion about medical school admission policies. The research had implications beyond personal vindication. If older students brought valuable perspectives and better outcomes to medicine, perhaps medical, schools should reconsider their subtle biases toward younger applicants. My data suggested that dismissing candidates based on age was not only unfair but potentially harmful to the profession. My family's reaction to the publication news was a mixture of pride and bewilderment. They understood that having research published in a medical journal was significant, but they didn't fully grasp the competitive nature of academic publishing or the prestige associated with the Journal of Medical Education. "So other doctors will read your article?" Mom asked during our weekly phone call. "Doctors, medical school admissions committees, policymakers, anyone interested in medical education reform," I explained. "And they'll see your name on it?" "Yes, Mom. Alannis M. Herrera, ND, will be listed as the primary author." The pride in her voice was unmistakable. "My daughter, the published researcher? Wait until I tell Mrs. Garcia at the grocery store." Sophia's response was more sophisticated, but equally enthusiastic. I looked up the journal online. "It has a really high impact factor, doesn't it? This is going to be great for your career." Her understanding of academic metrics impressed me. She'd taken the time to research the significance of the publication, rather than just offering generic congratulations. It reflected how much our relationship had evolved from the days when she dismissed my medical school plans. Marcus approached the achievement from his characteristic analytical angle. This could open doors for speaking engagements, consulting opportunities, maybe even teaching positions. He said during Sunday dinner, "Have you thought about the long-term career implications?" His strategic thinking was helpful, though I was still absorbing the immediate reality of being a published researcher. The article represented validation of my journey and insights that could potentially help other non-traditional students navigate medical school more successfully. The speaking invitations started, arriving within weeks of the journal's publication announcement. Medical schools wanted me to address their admissions committees about age diversity in student populations. Pre-med programs asked me to speak to older students who were considering career changes. Professional organizations invited me to present at conferences about improving medical education outcomes. My first speaking engagement was at my own alma mater, addressing incoming students during orientation week. Standing in the same lecture hall where I'd struggled through anatomy and biochemistry felt surreal. The audience included several students in their late 20s and early 30s, people who'd likely faced similar doubts about starting medical school later in life. How many of you have been told you're too old for medical school? I asked the crowd. About a dozen hands went up, scattered throughout the auditorium. How many of you believe that might be true? Fewer hands remained raised, but enough to indicate that age-related self-doubt was still affecting incoming students. I want to tell you about the research I conducted on students exactly like you. I continued, launching into the presentation that would become my signature talk over the following months. The data I presented was compelling. Older students brought emotional maturity, life experience, and diverse perspectives that enhanced both their own education and their classmates' learning. They were more likely to ask thoughtful questions, less likely to be intimidated by clinical rotations, and better at connecting with patients from various backgrounds. After the presentation, several students approached me with questions and gratitude. A 30-year-old former teacher wanted advice on managing finances during medical school. A 28-year-old veteran asked about balancing family responsibilities with academic demands. A 32-year-old single mother needed reassurance that her path to medicine was valid despite being unconventional. Your research gives me hope, the single mother told me. I've been worried that I'm making a mistake, but I should have done this 10 years ago. 10 years ago, you weren't ready, I replied. You're here now because this is exactly the right time for your journey. The speaking engagements multiplied as word spread about my research and presentation skills. The American Medical Association asked me to address their annual conference about diversifying the physician workforce. The Association of American Medical Colleges invited me to join a panel on non-traditional pathways to medicine. Each speaking opportunity reinforced the significance of what I'd studied and experienced. My personal journey from family disappointment to respected physician wasn't just an individual success story. It represented a broader pattern of how life experience could enhance medical practice in ways that traditional metrics didn't capture. The most meaningful recognition came from the Medical Education Research Society, which invited me to deliver the keynote address at their annual symposium. The theme was challenging assumptions in medical training, and my research on late career students perfectly aligned with their focus on educational innovation. Preparing for the keynote forced me to reflect on how far I traveled from those early days of hiding in CAT study guides and wondering if I was too old to start over. The research had grown from personal curiosity into professional expertise that was being recognized by leaders in medical education. My family attended the keynote presentation, sitting in the front row of a conference center filled with medical school deans, education researchers, and policymakers. Seeing them in the audience, mom in her best dress, dad adjusting his tie nervously, Marcus and Sophia with their phones ready to record my presentation made the moment even more significant. The question isn't whether older students can succeed in medical school, I concluded my keynote. The question is whether medical schools can afford to overlook the unique contributions these students bring to the profession. The standing ovation that followed felt like vindication, not just for my research, but for every non-traditional student who'd been told they were too old, too late, or too different to pursue medicine. My family clapped the loudest, their faces beaming with a pride that had been years in the making. After the presentation, colleagues approached with collaboration offers, medical schools extended teaching invitations, and policy organizations asked for consultation on admissions reform. The research I conducted to understand my own experience had opened professional doors I never imagined. But the most rewarding outcome was the steady stream of emails from older pre-med students and non-traditional medical school applicants who'd read my article or heard my presentations. They shared their own stories of doubt and determination, often ending with gratitude for providing evidence that their unconventional paths were not just valid but valuable. The published article now hangs framed in my office, not as a symbol of personal achievement, but as a reminder that our individual struggles can become sources of knowledge that help others navigate similar challenges. My late start in medicine had given me insights that could only come from living the experience. And those insights had contributed to conversations about improving medical education for everyone. The mentorship program certificate arrived with more ceremony than I'd expected. A formal presentation at the medical school's annual awards dinner, complete with a speech about my exemplary commitment to supporting non-traditional pathways in medicine. The recognition felt meaningful because it represented something I'd grown passionate about: helping others navigate the unique challenges of starting medical school. Later in life, what had begun as informal conversations with older pre-med students had evolved into a structured mentorship program that paired current non-traditional medical students with practicing physicians who'd followed similar paths. I served as the program coordinator, matching mentees with mentors based on shared experiences, specialty interests, and personal circumstances. My first official mentee was David Chun, a 35-year-old former software engineer who'd left a lucrative tech career to pursue medicine. His story resonated deeply with my own experience, the family members who questioned his sanity, the financial sacrifices required to return to school, and the imposter syndrome that plagued him during his first semester. "I feel like I'm constantly behind," he confided during one of our monthly coffee meetings. "My classmates talk about organic chemistry like it's a second language, and I'm still struggling with basic concepts I should have learned in college." "How old were your classmates when they took organic chemistry?" I asked. 20, maybe 21. "And how old were you?" 21 too, but that was 14 years ago. I haven't thought about molecular structures since then. "Exactly. You're not behind. You're learning information you learned once and then didn't use for over a decade. That's completely different from being intellectually incapable." Our conversations often focused on reframing the challenges of being an older student as differences rather than deficits. Yes, younger students might have more recent exposure to science coursework, but older students brought analytical skills, emotional maturity, and real-world experience that were equally valuable. The program grew rapidly as word spread through pre-med communities and medical schools. We had mentees ranging from 26 to 42, representing diverse backgrounds: former teachers, military veterans, business professionals, artists, and career changers of every description. One of my most memorable speaking engagements was at a pre-med conference for non-traditional students, where I addressed an audience of nearly 300 people considering career changes into medicine. The questions they asked revealed the common fears and concerns that had haunted my own journey years earlier. "Is it financially realistic to start medical school at 32 with student loan debt from my previous degree?" asked a woman who'd been working in nonprofit administration. "How do you maintain relationships with family and friends who don't understand why you're giving up a stable career?" wondered a former accountant. "What if I'm not smart enough to compete with students who are 10 years younger?" Worried a military veteran. Each question allowed me to share both research data and personal experience. The financial challenges were real but manageable with careful planning and realistic expectations. The relationship strain was temporary for people who truly supported your goals and permanent for those who didn't. The intelligence concern was almost always unfounded. Older students typically brought better study habits and stronger motivation than their younger counterparts. My family attended that particular speaking engagement, sitting toward the back of the conference center with expressions of amazement as they watched me address hundreds of people seeking guidance on career transitions into medicine. "I had no idea there were so many people like you," Mom said afterward. "I thought you were the only person crazy enough to start medical school so late." "There are thousands of us," I replied. "We just don't always recognize each other because we're scattered across different programs and graduation years." Sophia was particularly moved by the stories shared during the Q&A session. Listening to those people talk about their dreams and fears, it made me realize how brave you were to pursue medical school when everyone was telling you it was impossible. "Not impossible," I corrected. just impractical according to traditional timelines. Marcus had spent the conference taking notes, his legal mind analyzing the patterns and questions and concerns. "You should write a book," he said as we walked to our cars. There's clearly a market for guidance on non-traditional medical education paths. The idea intrigued me, though my immediate focus remained on the mentorship program and my growing research into how life experience affected medical practice outcomes. I was discovering that older physicians weren't just surviving in medicine, they were thriving in ways that challenged conventional assumptions about optimal career timing. The certificate from the mentorship program now hangs in my office alongside patient thank you notes and my medical school diploma, but its significance goes beyond personal recognition. It represents a commitment to ensuring that other people with unconventional timelines don't have to navigate the challenges of medical education alone. The program has produced dozens of successful graduates who've gone on to residencies in primary care, surgery, psychiatry, and every other specialty. More importantly, it's created a network of physicians who understand that diverse pathways to medicine strengthen the profession rather than weakening it. During my most recent speaking engagement, a first-year medical student approached me after my presentation with a question that perfectly captured why the mentorship program mattered. "Dr. Herrera, I'm 24 and sometimes feel intimidated by my older classmates who seem so confident and experienced. Do you have any advice for younger students learning alongside non-traditional students?" "Learn from them," I replied without hesitation. They chose medicine after experiencing other careers, other challenges, other ways of understanding the world. Their perspective will make you a better doctor, just like your fresh energy and recent academic training will help them. The mentorship program had become about more than helping older students succeed. It was fostering understanding between students of all ages and backgrounds, creating learning environments where diverse experiences were valued rather than merely tolerated. My family's evolving understanding of my work reflected broader changes in how medical education was beginning to value non-traditional students. They'd gone from seeing my age as a liability to recognizing it as an asset that benefited not just me, but everyone I worked with and everyone I taught. The certificate represents a teaching moment that extends far beyond formal mentorship. It's about demonstrating that success in medicine isn't limited to people who follow conventional timelines, and that the profession is stronger when it welcomes diverse pathways to healing. The thank you letters cover an entire wall in my home office, now hundreds of notes from patients whose lives I've touched, mentees I've guided through medical school, and colleagues who've been impacted by my research on non-traditional medical education. Reading through them on quiet evenings reminds me that the journey from family disappointment to respected physician has created ripples far beyond my own life. Mrs. Rodriguez, my elderly diabetic patient from residency, sent a card last month with a photo of her granddaughter's college graduation. "Mia became a nurse because she watched how you took care of me," she wrote in careful Spanish. "You inspired her to help people like you helped our family." David Chun, my first formal mentee, now practices emergency medicine in Seattle and runs his own mentorship program for career-changing medical students. His quarterly updates always include stories of older students he's helped navigate the challenges I once faced myself. Dr. Patricia Chun, my residency mentor, nominated me for the State Medical Association's Physician Excellence Award last year. In her nomination letter, she wrote, "Dr. Herrera exemplifies how diverse pathways to medicine enrich our profession." Her late start gave her insights that enhance her practice, research, and teaching in ways that would be impossible for someone who followed a traditional timeline. The recognition feels meaningful because it acknowledges not just my individual achievements, but the value of the perspective I bring to medicine because of my unconventional journey rather than despite it. My family's transformation has been perhaps the most profound change of all. They've evolved from people who worry about my impractical dreams to people who actively promote non-traditional education paths when talking to friends and neighbors. Mom has become an unofficial recruiter for career changers, telling anyone who mentions wanting to help people that it's never too late to pursue healthcare careers. Mrs. Martinez from church is thinking about going back to school to become a nurse practitioner, she told me during our last phone call. I gave her your number and said you could explain how to do it at her age. Dad's perspective has shifted. Even more dramatically, he's become a vocal advocate for people pursuing dreams later in life, drawing on my experience to encourage friends who've been considering career changes or delayed education goals. If Alannis could become a doctor at 28, you can become whatever you want at 45. I heard him tell a neighbor who was considering returning to school for engineering. Sophia's lupus diagnosis has been well managed for 3 years now, and our relationship has deepened beyond the crisis that initially brought us closer. She's become one of my strongest supporters, often sharing my research and speaking engagements on social media with captions about breaking age barriers in professional education. My sister proved that dreams don't have expiration dates. She posted after my most recent keynote presentation, proud to be related to someone who changed how we think about when it's too late to start over. Marcus has incorporated lessons from my journey into his own approach to life and career development. When his law firm considered promoting a lateral hire who was significantly older than typical partnership candidates, he advocated successfully for the candidate by citing research on how life experience enhances professional performance. I used your study on late career medical students to argue that age and experience are assets, not liabilities, he told me proudly. The most touching aspect of coming full circle is watching how my family now responds to other people's unconventional dreams, where they once projected their own fears and limitations onto ambitious goals. They now encourage risk-taking and support people who choose difficult paths later in life. Last month, Sophia called to tell me about a coworker who was considering leaving marketing to become a teacher at age 34. I told her about your journey and how you proved that starting over can be the best decision you ever make, Sophia said. She's applying to education programs this fall. The ripple effects extend beyond individual conversations. My research has influenced admissions policies at several medical schools, which now actively recruit older applicants and have eliminated subtle age biases from their evaluation criteria. The mentorship program has expanded to 12 medical schools across 3 states, creating support networks for hundreds of non-traditional students. But the most meaningful measure of impact is the steady stream of emails from people who've read my articles or attended my presentations and decided to pursue their own delayed dreams. A 40-year-old mother of 3 who became a physician assistant. A 35-year-old veteran who's now in his 2nd year of medical school. A 29-year-old former chef who's applying to nursing programs. Each story represents someone who might have talked themselves out of pursuing healthcare careers if they hadn't seen evidence that late starts could lead to meaningful success. Reflecting on the full circle from family disappointment to respected professional, I realized that every challenge I faced during my journey to medicine has become a source of strength for helping others navigate similar paths. The financial struggles taught me empathy for patients worried about medical bills. The academic challenges of returning to school after years away made me a better teacher for other non-traditional students. The family resistance I experienced helps. Let me counsel mentees whose loved ones don't understand their career transitions. Even the years I spent feeling lost and directionless now serve a purpose. They help me connect with patients and students who are struggling to find their calling or questioning whether they have valuable contributions to make. The wall of thank you letters represents thousands of lives touched by someone who was once considered the family failure. The person, too, old to start over, the dreamer whose aspirations seemed impractical and unrealistic. Each note reminds me that our individual journeys to finding our purpose can become maps for other people, seeking their own paths to meaning and contribution. The little girl who used to bring her mother dandelions and insists they were flowers grew up to become someone who helps other people recognize the hidden beauty in their own unconventional dreams. Coming full circle doesn't mean returning to where you started. It means carrying forward the lessons learned from a difficult journey to help others travel similar roads with greater confidence and support. My family's transformation from doubters to champions reflects a broader truth about how we all can evolve in our understanding of what's possible when someone we love refuses to accept limitations others try to impose on their dreams. The photo from the medical conference captures a moment I couldn't have imagined during those early years of doubt and struggle. There I am at the podium, delivering the keynote address on redefining success timelines in medical education, with my entire family seated in the front row. their faces beaming with pride and understanding that took years to develop. Mom wears the same navy dress she chose for my medical school graduation, but her expression is different now, confident rather than surprised, expectant rather than bewildered. She understands what I do, values the expertise I've developed, and has become my biggest advocate among her friends, who express doubts about their own children's unconventional career choices. Dad sits beside her, his posture reflecting the transformation in how he sees risk-taking and delayed dreams. His own abandoned medical school application taught him that some aspirations deserve pursuit regardless of timing, and my success validated his belief that our family's dreams weren't limited by traditional expectations. Marcus and Sophia flank them, no longer the successful siblings who wondered about their directionless sister, but colleagues in their own right who appreciate the unique path I took to find my calling. They've learned to see my late start as an asset rather than a liability, understanding that the life experience I gained before medical school made me a better physician than I could have been at 20-2. The conference audience extends beyond my family to include hundreds of medical educators, administrators, and policymakers who now recognize that diverse pathways to medicine strengthen the profession. My research on late career medical students has influenced admissions policies, mentorship programs, and support services at institutions across the country. But the true measure of new beginnings lies in the individual stories of transformation that my journey has inspired. Sarah, a 38-year-old former social worker, just matched into pediatrics after reading my article on non-traditional medical students. James, a 41-year-old veteran, starts medical school next fall after attending one of my presentations on career transitions into healthcare. Each person who decides to pursue medicine later in life represents a victory over the arbitrary limitations society places on when dreams can be realized. They prove that my experience wasn't exceptional, but part of a larger pattern of how life experience enhances rather than hinders medical practice. My current practice reflects the culmination of everything I've learned about medicine, teaching, and helping people navigate complex challenges. I still see patients regularly, maintaining the clinical skills that ground my research and teaching in real-world experience. But I've also expanded into medical education consultation, helping institutions develop programs that support students from diverse backgrounds and unconventional timelines. The phone calls that once felt like desperate pleas for help from family members dealing with medical crises have evolved into regular consultations where I serve as both sister and trusted advisor. Sophia's lupus remains well controlled, and she's become an advocate for patient education and shared decision-making in chronic disease management. Marcus has learned to manage his stress and anxiety, preventing the panic attacks that once sent him to the emergency room. Mom's single quotes as diabetes is stable, and she's become a model patient who takes her medications consistently and monitors her blood sugar religiously. Dad has started annual preventive care visits and addresses health concerns promptly rather than avoiding medical attention until problems become serious. Most importantly, they all understand that turning to me for medical guidance doesn't diminish their independence or reverse our parent-child relationships, simply adds another dimension to how we can care for each other as adults. The keynote presentation captured in the photo focused on a simple but revolutionary concept: that success in medicine isn't determined by when you start, but by the passion, preparation, and perspective you bring to the profession. The audience responded with enthusiasm because the message validated what many had observed but hadn't been able to articulate, that their older students often became their most dedicated, empathetic, and effective physicians. New beginnings in our family don't erase the years of misunderstanding and missed connections that characterized my medical school and residency years, but they represent growth, evolution, and the capacity for relationships to deepen when people are willing to see each other clearly rather than through the lens of old assumptions. The little girl who insisted that dandelions were flowers grew up to understand that beauty and value often exist in unexpected forms, flourishing in unlikely places, requiring patience and changed perspective to be fully appreciated. My late start in medicine wasn't a consolation prize or a lesser version of the traditional path. It was exactly the journey I needed to become the physician, researcher, teacher, and family member I was meant to be. Standing at that podium, looking out at my family and colleagues, I felt profound gratitude for every challenge that had shaped my unconventional path to medicine. The rejections, the financial struggles, the family doubts, the exhaustion of studying while working multiple jobs, all of it had been necessary. Preparation for this moment when I could help others navigate similar challenges with greater confidence. And support. The new beginning isn't just about professional recognition or family reconciliation, though both matter deeply. It's about understanding that our individual struggles to find and pursue our calling can become sources of wisdom and encouragement for others facing similar crossroads in their own lives. They said I was too old to go back to school. Now they're asking for medical advice, career guidance, and life wisdom from someone they once worried would never find her way. The transformation proves that it's never too late to start over, never too late to pursue dreams that others consider impractical, and never too late to become exactly who you were meant to be, regardless of how long it takes to get there. A photo from that conference now sits on my desk, reminding me daily that new beginnings are possible at any age, for anyone willing to persist through doubt and difficulty towards something meaningful. And sometimes, the people who question your dreams most vigorously become the ones who celebrate your success most enthusiastically, once they understand that your unconventional path led exactly where it needed to go.